Time now to go trucking around the queue for Brent Diesel Services, and it is a busy week in terms of off-ice news in the QMJHL. So let's just get started with the big piece of news you've no doubt heard by now. The QMJHL's East and West divisions have suspended play until October 28th, in which case they will reassess what can be done. Now, if you've been following the news, you'll know that teams in zones designated red in the province of Quebec are unable to play because teams cannot travel in and out of those zones. Well, as the teams mounted up in red zones, the Q made the decision to suspend, as Victoriaville, the latest team to join the red zone, along with Gatineau, Drummondville, Blainville-Boisbriand, and Quebec. Victoriaville could have played this weekend, but the league deciding to suspend play. Of course, in New Brunswick, the Moncton Wildcats find themselves in an orange zone, so they are not able to play at the moment. In addition to all those teams, there were outbreaks of COVID-19 on both the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada and the Sherbrooke Phoenix. Now, the majority of these Quebec teams are practicing, and the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada announced today they will return to practice on October 19th, and their arena will only be in use for them. It is a multi-ice pad complex, but only their Armada will be allowed to use it going forward, at least for the time being. Again, they'll be practicing along with the other Quebec teams and the Moncton Wildcats. Other major junior news along the same lines, the WHL has announced January 8th as its planned starting date. Originally, it was going to be in December. There was a lot of talk about the Quebec-based teams receiving funding, and the number came down this week. It is $12 million. Each team in Quebec will receive $1 million from the government. It's part of $70 million in funding for sports and recreation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. News coming down the wire today, the Cape Breton Eagles have made a trade as forward Matthias Laferriere has been traded to the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada, whom he originally played for. The Eagles get a third-round pick from the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada in return. It was originally Bathurst's pick in 2021. Last year, Laferriere had 48 points in 40 games. Now, he is a signed draft pick of the St. Louis Blues. He'd be a 20-year-old in the queue. The Blues have given permission for Laferriere to start the season with Blainville-Boisbriand, but what would happen if the AHL season were to resume, we're unsure at this time, but it looks like he will be playing in the queue to start his season. Some news from around the QMJHL, no surprise here. Alexis Lafreniere has signed a 3-year entry-level contract with the New York Rangers, and he will not be reporting to Rimouski. He's just going to get ready for his pro career. Last year, he had an eye-popping 112 points in 52 games before he was the number 1 pick in the NHL draft. He will wear number 13 for the Rangers this year. Another one of the Q's draft class from this year has signed, and that is Vasily Ponomarev. He was drafted in round 2 with the Carolina Hurricanes, and they have signed him to a 3-year entry-level contract. He has 3 points in 4 games to start this season. Last year, he had 49 points in 57 games. He's one of just 4 imports currently playing in the QMJHL. His father works for the Shawinigan Cataracts, so the Cataracts able to fast-track his progress into Shawinigan. Other news about the Shawinigan Cataracts, Leon Denny of Eskazoni has left the Cataracts. He had requested a trade earlier this year. The team apparently was not happy with the shape that he showed up to in camp. He had 15 points in 61 games last season, but was mainly a very, very strong defensive presence on the back end for Shawinigan. He actually didn't play in the Cataracts games last year. The team will try to trade him, and if they're unable to, he will play in Junior A. Another roster note regarding 20-year-olds, Alexis Graval is officially back in Halifax. We reported that this was likely to be the case. Well, now it's official. The 20-year-old goaltender last year had a goals against of .396, a save percentage of .893, and a record of 12-26. Halifax's 3 20-year-olds are currently goaltender Cole McLaren, defenseman Jason Horvath, and forward Liam Payton. Going back to the 20-year-old situation in Shawinigan for a second, earlier this year, the Cataracts parted ways with Kirill Nishnikov, so they're down to 1 20-year-old on the roster, and that 20-year-old, Jack York, the defenseman they signed into the OHL, is currently injured. So for the time being, if games were to resume, Shawinigan would have no 20-year-olds in the lineup. QMJHL announced its Team of the Week for the second weekend of action, and it could be the last time for a while we see all 18 teams eligible for players on this team, or close to 18 teams, as of course Blainville and Sherbrooke did not play last weekend. The forwards are 16-year-old Antonin Verreau from the Gatineau Olympique, who had 4 points in 2 games. 19-year-old Xavier Simoneau of Drummondville is on the team. He had 5 points in 2 games. And Shawinigan's Maverick Bork is the Player of the Week. He had 5 points in 2 games as well. The 18-year-old forward, a key part of the Shawinigan team. Of course, at the back end, you may have heard about this already. Eagles defenseman Jared Baker on this week's team. He had 4 points and was +2 over 2 games for the overage defenseman. 19-year-old defenseman Vincent Sevigny of the Victoriaville Tigre had 3 assists in 2 games with a +3 rating, so the 19-year-old also won the Team of the Week. The goaltender of the week is 18-year-old Francisco Lapena of the Drummondville Voltigeurs. He had a record of 2-0, a goals against average of .98 with a save percentage of .963. Talking about imports earlier in the pregame show, well, there are 2 more imports on the way to the QMJHL as the Quebec Remparts have secured the proper paperwork for their 2 Finns, and they have landed in Quebec City. Their first-round pick this year is 17-year-old Viljami Margela. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He had 35 points in 20 games in the U18 Finnish League last year. He's a 17-year-old forward. Their second-round choice was Apo Silvanen. The 18-year-old defenseman had 16 points in 38 penalty minutes in 18 games in the U18 Finnish League last year. Now, it's interesting, the Remparts have access to their Europeans, but Patrick Waugh was very vocal in a press conference earlier this week about the CHL's handling of the European situation. He said he was disappointed with the lack of support coming from the CHL, and he says he feels the project will be fast-tracked once the OHL begins play. The Remparts worked with a Toronto law firm that specializes in foreign law in order to get the release of their 2 new Finnish players. Note about a former Eagle, Clark Bishop has signed a 1-year, 2-way contract with the Carolina Hurricanes organization. It will pay him $700,000 a year for the year. He spent 5 games in the NHL last year and had 19 points in 53 games with AHL Charlotte. One last note to pass along, and it's an unfortunate one. U Sport has canceled the National Hockey Championship for Canadian college hockey this year. It's the first time since 1961 that there will not be a National Hockey Championship. The first time they've canceled any national championship of varsity sport. And, of course, this is as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, of note, we're going to hear from Wilson Forrest, former Eagles defenseman, on the broadcast this weekend, and actually had recorded that interview prior to getting the announcement. So unfortunate for Wilson, Derek Gentile, and all the other Eagles hoping to vie for a national championship this year. That will not be the case. That is another installment of Trucking Around the League. You are listening to the pregame show on McDonald Auto Hub, Cape Breton Eagles Hockey, 1270 CJCB.